Admiral Victoria Hayes had survived combat zones, congressional hearings, and the kind of loneliness that comes from choosing duty over everything else. But nothing prepared her for the moment she overheard a janitor describe her soul to a room full of strangers who had never bothered to see her as anything more than rank and uniform. It happened on a Thursday evening in the break room of the Naval Operations Center, a place she rarely visited, because admirals don't typically cross paths with maintenance staff. But her office coffee machine had broken, and she needed caffeine to survive another late night, reviewing deployment schedules. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she entered, expecting emptiness. Instead, she found laughter. 4 janitors sat around a plastic table, sharing sandwiches from paper bags. They didn't notice her immediately. She stood in the doorway, uniform pressed to perfection, 3 stars gleaming on her shoulders, feeling suddenly like an intruder in a world that existed parallel to her own but never touched it. One of the janitors, a younger man with an easy smile, was holding court. "Come on, Marcus," he teased. "You've been single for 2 years. What's your type? You gotta have standards." Marcus. Victoria's eyes shifted to the man they were addressing. He sat slightly apart from the group, older than the others, maybe mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard years. His janitorial uniform was clean but faded, and his hands wrapped around a thermos of what she guessed was cheap coffee. There was something about his posture, straight-backed, disciplined, that didn't quite match the humble work he did. He smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had learned to deflect. "I don't think about it much, Tony. I've got Ethan to think about." "Your kid's 13. Another janitor, an older woman named Rosa, chimed in gently. "He wants you to be happy too, mijo, so humor us. If you could describe your perfect woman, what would she be like? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." Victoria should have announced herself, should have walked to the coffee machine, poured her cup, and left. But something held her frozen in the doorway, hidden by the angle of the wall. She told herself she was simply waiting for a natural break in their conversation. She told herself it had nothing to do with curiosity about what this man, this invisible man who cleaned her building every night, might say. Marcus sighed, recognizing he wouldn't escape without answering. He set down his thermos and stared at it for a long moment, as if the words he needed were written in the steam. "All right," he said quietly. "If I'm being honest, not that it matters, I'd want someone who carries herself with dignity. Someone who doesn't need to announce her strength because everyone can feel it when she walks into a room. Someone disciplined, the kind of person who keeps her word, even when it costs her." Victoria's breath caught. She pressed herself flatter against the wall. Marcus continued, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "I'd want someone who understands sacrifice, who's made the hard choices and carries the weight of them without complaining. Someone who maybe gave up too much for her work and doesn't quite know how to stop working long enough to live." He paused. "Someone lonely, even though she'd never admit it. Someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be seen as a person instead of a position." The break room had gone quiet. Even Tony wasn't smiling anymore. "Someone," Marcus finished, his voice barely above a whisper, "who needs someone to remind her that she's more than what she's accomplished, that she deserves rest, that she deserves to be cared for, not just respected." Rosa's eyes were misty. "Marcus, that's beautiful and specific." He shrugged, embarrassed. "You asked." "You just described a woman who doesn't exist," Tony said, but his tone was gentle, not mocking. "Maybe," Marcus agreed, "or maybe she exists and I'll never meet her because we live in different worlds. Either way, it doesn't matter. I've got Ethan, I've got work, and that's enough. But the sadness in his voice suggested it wasn't enough. It suggested he had learned to accept less than he wanted, because wanting more felt dangerous. Victoria stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every word he had spoken was a mirror held up to her life. The sacrifice, the loneliness, the forgotten personhood beneath the rank, the desperate need to be seen. How could a janitor, a man who cleaned floors and emptied trash bins, see her more clearly than anyone in her command staff? How could he describe the ache inside her chest that she had buried so deep even she pretended it didn't exist? She should leave. She should absolutely leave right now. Instead, she stepped into the doorway. All four janitors looked up, their expressions shifting instantly from relaxed to startled. Tony straightened. Rosa's hand flew to her chest. Marcus simply stared, his eyes widening slightly. "Admiral Hayes," Rosa stammered, standing quickly. "We didn't know you were at ease," Victoria said, her voice carrying the automatic authority of decades in command. But it came out softer than she intended. "I'm just here for coffee." She moved to the machine, hyper-aware of the silence behind her. Her hands felt unsteady as she pulled a disposable cup from the stack and pressed the button. The coffee streamed out slowly, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet room. Marcus hadn't looked away from her. She could feel his gaze like heat on her back. The coffee finished. She turned, cup in hand, and found herself meeting his eyes directly for the first time. They were dark brown, thoughtful, and held an intelligence that didn't match the mop and bucket she knew waited for him in the supply closet. "Thank you for keeping this place running," she said to the group, but her eyes stayed on Marcus. "I know your work often goes unnoticed. It shouldn't." "Thank you, ma'am," Rosa said warmly. Victoria nodded once, then turned to leave, but as she reached the doorway, she heard Marcus's voice, quiet but clear. "Admiral." She stopped, turned back. He stood now, hands at his sides, respectful but not cowering. "I hope your evening gets easier, ma'am. You look like you've been carrying a heavy load today." It was such a simple observation, such a kind human thing to say, and it shattered something inside her that had been holding together through sheer force of will. "Thank you," she managed, her voice tight. "It has been long." She left before anyone could see the way her throat closed or the way her eyes burned. Back in her office, Victoria set down the coffee without drinking it. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her desk, trying to steady herself, trying to understand what had just happened. A janitor had described her. Not her rank, not her accomplishments. Her, the woman underneath the uniform. The lonely, tired, overworked woman who had sacrificed everything for duty and wondered late at night when the paperwork was finally done if it had been worth it. And he had described her with such tenderness, as if she were someone worth caring for. Victoria pulled up the building personnel files on her computer. She told herself it was routine. She told herself she was simply reviewing staff, making sure everything was in order, but her fingers typed Marcus into the search bar without hesitation. Marcus Chen, age 46, employed as custodial staff for 3 years. Previous employment, United States Navy, retired lieutenant commander. Medical discharge following injury sustained during Operation Enduring Freedom. Commendations for valor, leadership, and distinguished service. Victoria's breath left her lungs in a rush. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a decorated officer who had served with honor and been forced out by circumstances beyond his control. He had fallen from the world she inhabited into the invisible margins, and no one had noticed. No one had seen him, except she had just seen him, and he had seen her. She read further. Single father, 13-year-old son, Ethan, attending local public school. Wife deceased 7 years ago, cancer. Marcus had left active duty to care for her during her illness, then stayed out to raise their son alone. The medical discharge came later after a training accident, reopened old combat injuries, leaving him with chronic pain that disqualified him from active service. He had sacrificed everything, his career, his future, his body, and now he cleaned floors in the building where men and women with half his experience gave orders and received salutes. Victoria closed the file and stared at the blank screen. She thought about the way he had described his ideal woman, the loneliness, the sacrifice, the forgotten personhood. He had been describing himself too. Over the following week, Victoria found herself noticing Marcus in ways she never had before. Not because she sought him out, she told herself, but because once you truly see someone, you can't unsee them. She noticed that he arrived exactly at 5:30 every evening and worked until 2 in the morning. She noticed that he cleaned with meticulous care, the precision of someone trained in military discipline. She noticed that when he passed officers in the halls, he nodded respectfully but never tried to engage, as if he understood he existed in a separate category now. She noticed he limped slightly on his left side, and she noticed that every time she worked late, which was almost every night, he cleaned her floor last, as if he knew she needed the quiet space uninterrupted for as long as possible. One evening, 2 weeks after the break room incident, Victoria stayed later than usual. Budget crisis, personnel issues, the kind of night where the walls of her office felt like they were closing in, and the weight on her shoulders threatened to crush her spine. It was nearly midnight when she heard the soft knock on her doorframe. She looked up, expecting her aide. Instead, Marcus stood there, mop bucket beside him, holding a covered paper cup. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Admiral," he said quietly, "but I noticed you've been here since 0600 this morning. Thought you might need this more than the break room coffee." He stepped forward and set the cup on her desk. The smell hit her immediately. Real coffee, good coffee, the kind that came from an actual cafe, not a machine. She stared at it, then at him. "You brought me coffee." "I stopped by a place on my way in," he said simply. "They know how I like it. Thought you might appreciate it. Black, 2 sugars. I guessed based on—" He stopped himself. "Based on what?" she asked, curious despite herself. He smiled slightly, almost sheepishly. "Based on the fact that you strike me as someone who appreciates efficiency, but hasn't completely given up on small pleasures. Black for efficiency. 2 sugars because you deserve something sweet in a day that's probably been bitter." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. She picked up the cup with both hands, feeling its warmth. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out softer than she had intended. "This is very kind." "It's just coffee, ma'am." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's not." They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, favoring his right leg. She noticed. "How bad is the injury?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am." "Your leg. I read your file. Operation Enduring Freedom. Medical discharge. You're in pain right now." He was quiet for a moment, clearly surprised she knew. Surprised she had looked. "It's manageable," he said finally. "Some days better than others." "You were a lieutenant commander," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was," he acknowledged. "Long time ago." 3 years isn't that long. Feels like a different life." His tone wasn't bitter, just factual. Different world. Victoria set down the coffee cup and stood, moving around her desk. She shouldn't do this, shouldn't cross this line, but she was so tired of lines. "I heard what you said," she told him quietly, "in the break room, 2 weeks ago. His face shifted, understanding, embarrassment, maybe something else. I didn't know you were there, he said. I know. She took a breath. You described me, Marcus. Exactly. He swallowed hard. She watched his throat work. I didn't mean… Yes, you did, she interrupted gently. And you were right, about all of it. The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Victoria was an admiral. He was a janitor. This conversation should not be happening. Every regulation, every protocol, every carefully maintained boundary in her life screamed at her to stop. But she was so desperately tired of being lonely. I don't know what you want me to say, ma'am, Marcus said quietly. Tell me your son's name, she said. Tell me something real, not rank, not protocol, just something true. He studied her face, and she saw the exact moment he decided to trust her. Ethan, he said. He's 13, brilliant kid, wants to be an engineer, builds things out of anything he can find. He's the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I keep going when everything hurts. You're a good father, Victoria said. I try to be. He paused. What about you? Do you have… No, she said, and the word came out too sharp. She softened. No family, no children. I chose the Navy. I chose duty. And some days I wonder if that was the right choice. Was it? He asked. The question hung between them, honest and raw. I don't know anymore, Victoria admitted. It was the first time she had said those words out loud. Ever. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the hardest place to be, when you've given everything and you're not sure it was worth it. You understand, she whispered. Yeah, he said. I do. They stood there in her office, Admiral and Janitor, two people who had sacrificed everything for duty and found themselves on opposite sides of an invisible line that suddenly felt meaningless. Victoria knew this moment mattered, knew it was a turning point. She could step back, thank him for the coffee, and return to her carefully controlled life. Or she could step forward. She stepped forward. Would you like to sit down? She asked, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Just for a moment, just to talk. Marcus hesitated. Every rule said he should decline. Every instinct probably told him this was dangerous. But he sat down, and for the first time in years, Admiral Victoria Hayes felt like someone actually saw her. Not the rank, not the accomplishments, not the uniform, just her. The conversation that followed was quiet, careful, but real. They talked about service, about sacrifice, about the cost of duty and the weight of choices that could never be unmade. They talked about his son, about her career, about the strange parallel paths their lives had taken. And when Marcus finally stood to leave, nearly an hour later, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Thank you, she said as he picked up his mop bucket, for the coffee and for staying. Thank you for seeing me, he replied simply. After he left, Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the empty coffee cup. She had spent 30 years building walls, building rank, building distance between herself and everyone else, and a janitor had walked through all of it with nothing but kindness and truth. She didn't know what happened next, didn't know if this was the beginning of something or just a single moment of connection in an otherwise isolated life. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wanted to see him again, not as an admiral observing staff, as a woman seeing a man who understood her soul. And that terrified her more than any combat zone ever had. The following Tuesday, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She left her office at a reasonable hour, not because her work was finished. Her work was never finished, but because she knew Marcus arrived at 5:30 and she wanted to be there when he did. She told herself it was to thank him properly for the coffee. She told herself it was simple courtesy. She was lying to herself. and she knew it. She waited in her office, door slightly ajar, listening for the sound of his cart in the hallway. When she heard the familiar squeak of wheels, her heart jumped in a way that felt absurd for a woman her age, for a woman of her rank. She stepped into the hallway just as he rounded the corner. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering across his face. "Admiral," he said, nodding respectfully. "Working late again?" "Actually, I was hoping to catch you," she said, and watched his eyebrows rise slightly. "I wanted to properly thank you for the coffee last week. You made a difficult night bearable." Something softened in his expression. "It was nothing, ma'am." "It was something," she corrected gently. "And I was wondering if you might allow me to return the favor. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here. Good coffee. They stay open late, if you're interested." She watched him process the invitation, watched the surprise, the uncertainty, the careful consideration of what this might mean. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that's appropriate," she finished for him. "Probably not, but I'm asking anyway." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have to pick up my son at 8:30. He has tutoring sessions on Tuesdays." "Then we have 2 hours," Victoria said, "if you're willing." He studied her face, searching for something. Permission, maybe, or assurance that this wasn't some kind of test. "All right," he said finally, "but I'm buying my own coffee." Victoria smiled. "Fair enough." The coffee shop was small, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of place that served actual mugs instead of paper cups, and didn't rush you to leave. They sat in a corner booth, away from the windows, though Victoria wasn't sure if she was hiding or simply seeking privacy. Marcus ordered black coffee with 2 sugars. Victoria noticed. "You remembered," she said. "You made an impression," he replied simply. They sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither spoke. The weight of their different worlds hung between them. But then Marcus broke the silence with a question she didn't expect. "Why did you look up my file?" Victoria could have deflected, could have given some official reason. Instead, she chose honesty. "Because you saw me," she said quietly. "In that break room, you described someone I've spent decades pretending I'm not, and I needed to know who you were, how you could possibly see what everyone else misses." Marcus turned his coffee mug slowly in his hands. "It's not hard to see loneliness when you live with it yourself." "Is that what you see when you look at me?" Victoria asked. "Loneliness? I see someone who's given everything to duty and wonders if anyone would notice if she stopped," Marcus said. His voice was gentle, not accusatory. "I see someone who's forgotten how to be anything except what everyone needs her to be." Victoria's throat tightened. "You're right. I know," he said, "because I look in the mirror and see the same thing." They talked for nearly 2 hours, and it felt like minutes. Marcus told her about Ethan, about how brilliant and stubborn and kind his son was, about how terrifying it was to raise a child alone, to worry constantly that he wasn't enough, wasn't giving Ethan everything he deserved. Victoria told him about her career, about the choices she'd made, the relationships she'd sacrificed, the family gatherings she'd missed until her family stopped inviting her, about her younger sister who had stopped calling 2 years ago because Victoria never called back. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Some days," Victoria admitted. "And then I think about the lives saved by the decisions I made, the sailors who came home because of operations I planned, and I tell myself it was worth it. But lately," she trailed off. "Lately, it's harder to believe," Marcus finished. "Yes." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "You did good, Victoria. Whatever else is true, you did good." It was the first time he'd used her first name. The intimacy of it hit her like a physical force. So did you, she said. Raising Ethan alone, serving with honor, surviving. Some days survival doesn't feel like enough, he said quietly. No, she agreed. It doesn't. When Marcus finally checked his watch and realized he needed to pick up Ethan, Victoria felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She didn't want the evening to end, didn't want to return to her empty apartment where the silence pressed against her like a weight. Outside the coffee shop, Marcus hesitated. Would you like to do this again? Maybe next Tuesday? Victoria's heart lifted. I'd like that very much. Good, he said and smiled. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, less burdened. As she watched him walk away, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in decades. She felt seen, she felt known, and she felt terrified of how much that mattered. The following week, their Tuesday coffee became routine. Then it became the thing Victoria looked forward to most. Not the promotions or commendations or important meetings, but 2 hours in a corner booth with a man who understood the weight she carried because he carried his own. They talked about everything, about Marcus's time in the Navy, about the missions he couldn't forget, about the injury that ended his career and the wife he lost shortly after, about how he'd tried to go back to active duty after her death, thinking work would numb the pain only to fail the medical evaluation and realize he had to find a new life. The hardest part wasn't losing the rank, Marcus confessed one evening. It was losing my identity. I was a naval officer. That's who I was. And suddenly I wasn't anymore. I was just a single dad who couldn't pass a physical. I didn't know who that person was supposed to be. And now? Victoria asked. Now I'm learning, he said. Learning that my worth isn't tied to rank or medals, that being Ethan's father matters more than any mission I ever ran. But it's hard. Some days I see younger officers giving orders and I think about who I used to be, who I could have been. Victoria understood that ache intimately. I look at my sister's life sometimes, she admitted. She has 3 kids, a husband who adores her, a house full of noise and chaos and love. And I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd chosen differently, if I'd said no to one deployment, if I'd prioritized family over career. Would you have been happy? Marcus asked. I don't know, Victoria said honestly, but I think I would have been less lonely. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. You don't have to be lonely anymore, if you don't want to be. Victoria's breath caught. Marcus, I know what this looks like, he interrupted gently. I know the regulations, I know the ranks, but I also know that this, what we have on Tuesday nights, is the most real thing in my life right now, and I think it might be real for you too. She wanted to deny it, wanted to hide behind protocol and propriety, but she was so tired of hiding. It is real, she whispered, terrifyingly real. Then maybe we stop pretending it's just coffee, Marcus said. Maybe we acknowledge that this matters, that we matter. Victoria looked at him across the small table, this man who had been invisible to her for years, who now felt essential to her survival. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be anything except an admiral. Then let me help you remember, Marcus said. Let me show you that you're more than your rank, that you deserve to be cared for, to be known, to be happy. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The tears came before Victoria could stop them. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold them back, but they spilled over anyway. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, holding it firmly, grounding her. It's okay, he said softly. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to want this. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, he admitted. but I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone." That night marked a shift. They stopped pretending their Tuesday meetings were casual. They stopped maintaining careful distance. They began calling each other by their first names consistently. Victoria began texting Marcus during the day, just small messages about her meetings or frustrations. Marcus would send photos of things Ethan built, little glimpses into his world, and slowly, carefully, they began letting each other in. 3 weeks after that pivotal conversation, Marcus invited Victoria to meet Ethan, not as an admiral, as Victoria, as someone important to his father. She almost said no. The responsibility of meeting a child, of being someone who mattered in that child's life, felt enormous, but the hope in Marcus's eyes stopped her. "He knows I've been spending time with someone," Marcus explained. "He knows you're important to me, and he's curious. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just come to dinner, let him meet you, let yourself be part of something that isn't work." Victoria agreed, terrified. Saturday evening, she stood outside Marcus's apartment building, wearing civilian clothes that felt strange on her body. Jeans, a sweater, no uniform, no armor. Marcus opened the door with a smile that made her forget to breathe. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I know," he said, "but you're here. That's what matters." The apartment was small but immaculately clean, filled with evidence of life actually being lived. Ethan's drawings covered the refrigerator, books stacked on every available surface, a well-worn couch that had clearly been sat on thousands of times. And then Ethan appeared, lanky and 13 and looking so much like his father that Victoria's heart ached. "Hi," he said shyly. "You're Victoria." "I am," she said, extending her hand. "You must be Ethan. Your dad talks about you constantly." Ethan shook her hand solemnly, then grinned. "He talks about you too, says you're really smart and really important." "I'm just a person," Victoria said, "like you." "Dad says you're an admiral," Ethan said, eyes wide. "That's so cool. Do you fly planes?" "I coordinate operations," Victoria explained. "I help make sure everyone stays safe and missions succeed." "So you're like the brain of everything," Ethan said thoughtfully. "That's even cooler than flying." Victoria felt something warm bloom in her chest. This child, who had never met her before, saw her accomplishments with pure admiration, no jealousy or intimidation or judgment. Dinner was simple, pasta and salad, nothing fancy, but it was the best meal Victoria had eaten in years, because it wasn't eaten alone in her silent apartment, or at her desk buried in paperwork. It was eaten at a small table with people who laughed and talked and included her in their inside jokes. Ethan told her about his engineering project, about the bridge he was building from popsicle sticks that had to hold 20 pounds. Marcus explained the math and physics behind it, with the ease of someone who had taught countless junior officers. Victoria found herself offering suggestions, her strategic mind finding applications in bridge architecture. "You think like an engineer," Ethan said admiringly. "Dad, she thinks like you used to." Marcus smiled at her across the table. "She thinks like a lot of things. That's why she's an admiral." After dinner, Ethan disappeared to his room to work on homework. Marcus and Victoria sat on the couch, close enough to touch, but not quite touching, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. "He likes you," Marcus said quietly. "I like him," Victoria replied. "He's extraordinary. You've done an amazing job raising him." "It hasn't been easy," Marcus admitted, "but he makes it worth it. Every hard day, every sacrifice, it's worth it because of him." Victoria turned to face him fully. "I need to tell you something." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Okay?" "My staff has noticed I've been leaving earlier on Tuesdays," Victoria said. "My aide asked me yesterday if everything was all right, if I was feeling unwell, because apparently leaving before midnight is so unusual that people assume something's wrong. What did you tell him? Marcus asked. I told him I was fine, Victoria said. But the truth is, I'm not fine. I'm terrified. Because us, what we're building, it matters more to me than anything has mattered in years. And I don't know how to reconcile that with who I'm supposed to be. Marcus took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Who says you can't be both? An admiral and a woman who deserves happiness. The Navy says, Victoria said bitterly, regulations say. Every person who expects me to be nothing but duty and discipline says. Then maybe, Marcus said carefully, it's time to stop living for what everyone else expects. Maybe it's time to live for what you want. What if what I want costs me everything I've built? Victoria whispered. What if what you've built is costing you everything that matters? Marcus countered gently. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Victoria did something she had never done before. She leaned into Marcus, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, and for the first time in decades, Victoria felt safe enough to simply be. I don't know how this ends, she admitted. Neither do I, Marcus said, but I know I want to find out. With you. Over the following weeks, Victoria's world began to shift in small but significant ways. She started leaving work at 8 instead of midnight. She attended Ethan's school science fair, sitting proudly in the audience as he presented his bridge project. She met Rosa and Tony and the other janitors, not as an admiral but as Marcus's friend, and they welcomed her with surprising warmth. But she also began noticing the looks, the whispers, her aides' increasing concern about her schedule changes, her executive officers' pointed questions about her well-being. And then came the day that threatened everything. Victoria was in a meeting with her commanding officers when her phone buzzed. She normally ignored calls during meetings, but something made her glance at the screen. Marcus. He never called during work hours unless it was urgent. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Marcus, what's wrong? His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. It's Ethan. There was an accident at school. He fell during gym class. They're taking him to the hospital. I'm on my way there now, but Victoria, I'm scared. They said he hit his head and he's not waking up, and I can't lose him. I can't lose him too. Victoria's training kicked in immediately. Which hospital? Naval Medical Center. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Victoria said. Stay calm. He's strong. You raised him strong. She ended the call and returned to the meeting room. 6 pairs of eyes turned to her, questioning. I need to leave, she said. Family emergency. Her executive officer frowned. Ma'am, you don't have family in the area. Victoria met his eyes steadily. I do now. She left without waiting for permission, without caring about protocol or appearances or any of the rules she had lived by for 30 years, because Marcus needed her, Ethan needed her, and for the first time in her life, personal need outweighed professional duty. At the hospital, she found Marcus in the emergency waiting room, pacing like a caged animal, his face gray with fear. When he saw her, something in him broke. Victoria, he breathed, and she crossed the room quickly, pulling him into her arms. He held onto her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. They won't tell me anything yet. They said they're running tests, but he's still unconscious, and what if— Don't, Victoria said firmly. Don't go there. He's getting the best care. This is Naval Medical. They're the best. He's going to be okay. You can't know that, Marcus whispered against her shoulder. No, Victoria admitted, but I believe it, and you need to believe it too. They sat together in the waiting room, Marcus's hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt. Victoria didn't care. She held him, offering the only thing she had, her presence, her certainty, her refusal to let him face this terror alone. An hour later, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Chen?" Marcus stood so quickly he swayed. Victoria steadied him. "That's me. How is he?" "Ethan is awake," the doctor said, and Marcus's knees nearly buckled with relief. "He has a concussion, mild, but we want to keep him overnight for observation. He's asking for you." "Can I see him?" Marcus asked desperately. "Of course. Room 212. Marcus turned to Victoria, his eyes wet. "Come with me, please." "Are you sure?" Victoria asked. "I've never been more sure of anything," Marcus said. They walked to Ethan's room together. The boy lay in the hospital bed, pale and scared but awake. When he saw his father, he started crying. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Marcus rushed to his side, taking his hand carefully. "You have nothing to be sorry for, nothing. You're okay. That's all that matters." "I scared you," Ethan said, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah," Marcus admitted. "You did, but you're here, you're awake, and I'm not letting you out of my sight for at least a decade." Ethan laughed weakly, then noticed Victoria standing in the doorway. "Victoria, you came too?" She stepped forward, her throat tight. "Of course I came. You're important to me, Ethan." "Really?" he asked, and the vulnerability in that single word broke her heart. "Really," she confirmed. "Your dad called me and I dropped everything because you and your father matter to me. Very much." Ethan looked between them, understanding dawning on his young face. "Are you and Dad, like, together?" Victoria looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at her. And in that moment, with Ethan safe in a hospital bed, and their hearts laid bare, the truth became undeniable. "Yes," Marcus said simply. "We are." "Good," Ethan said sleepily, the medication clearly taking effect. "Dad needs someone, and you seem really nice. Plus you're super smart. That's cool." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know." As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Marcus pulled Victoria into the hallway. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have called you during work. I shouldn't have asked you to—" "Stop," Victoria interrupted. "I'm glad you called. I'm glad I was here. This is where I needed to be." "But your meeting," Marcus said. "Your command." "Doesn't matter," Victoria said. "Not compared to this. Not compared to you and Ethan." Marcus stared at her. "Victoria, are you saying—" "I'm saying I choose this," Victoria said firmly. "I choose you. I choose Ethan. I choose having a life that's about more than duty and sacrifice. I've spent 30 years being an admiral. Maybe it's time I remember how to be a person too." Marcus pulled her close, holding her tightly. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but I love you." Victoria closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. "I love you too." They stood there in the hospital hallway, holding each other. Two people who had been invisible to the world in different ways, finally, seeing each other completely. But Victoria knew that choosing this life meant facing consequences in the other, and those consequences were coming faster than she expected. The next morning her phone rang. Her commanding officer's name appeared on the screen. She answered. "Admiral Hayes." "Victoria, we need to talk. My office. Tomorrow morning at 0700. This is not optional." The line went dead. Marcus looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "Judgment Day," Victoria said quietly. "They know, and now I have to face what choosing you means for my career." "You don't have to choose," Marcus said desperately. "We can keep this quiet. We can—" "No," Victoria interrupted. "I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending the only thing that matters is rank and duty. You and Ethan matter. This matters. And if they can't accept that, then maybe it's time for me to find a new path." Marcus took her hands. "Are you sure?" Victoria thought about 30 years of loneliness. 30 years of sacrifice, 30 years of being nothing but an admiral. And then she thought about Tuesday night coffee, about Ethan's smile, about Marcus seeing her, truly seeing her, and loving what he saw. "I'm sure," she said, "whatever came next, they would face it together." Victoria arrived at her commanding officer's building at exactly 06:55 the next morning. She wore her uniform with the same precision she always had, every ribbon in place, every crease sharp, but inside her heart hammered against her ribs. Admiral Frank Morrison had been her mentor for 20 years. He had recommended her for promotion, supported her through congressional hearings, and stood by her when others questioned whether a woman could handle combat operations. She respected him more than almost anyone in the Navy, and now she had to face his disappointment. His aide showed her into the office immediately. Morrison stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the morning fog rolling across the base. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sir," Victoria said, standing at attention. "At ease, Victoria." His voice was tired. "Sit down." She sat. He finally turned, and the look on his face was worse than anger. It was concern mixed with confusion. "I'm going to be direct," Morrison said, settling into his chair. "Multiple members of your staff have expressed concern about changes in your behavior over the past month. Leaving early. Missing calls. Yesterday, you walked out of a critical operations meeting for what you called a family emergency, but according to your personnel file, you have no immediate family in this region." Victoria met his eyes steadily. "That's correct, sir. I don't have biological family here." "Then explain yesterday," Morrison said. Victoria took a breath. This was the moment. The choice between the life she'd built and the life she wanted. "I was at the hospital with someone I care about," she said. "His 13-year-old son had been injured. He needed me, and I chose to be there." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Someone you care about?" "Yes, sir." "Victoria, help me understand. You've never taken personal time, never prioritized anything over duty, and now you're walking out of meetings for someone you won't even name?" "His name is Marcus Chen," Victoria said quietly. "He's a retired lieutenant commander, medical discharge, currently employed as custodial staff at the Naval Operations Center. We've been seeing each other for the past 6 weeks. Morrison's expression shifted through several emotions. Surprise, understanding, then something that looked like sadness. "The janitor, the decorated naval officer," Victoria corrected firmly, "the single father, the man who served with honor and was forced out by circumstances beyond his control. Yes, he cleans floors now, but that doesn't define who he is." "I'm not judging his character," Morrison said carefully. "I'm concerned about yours, about your judgment, about what this looks like." "What does it look like, sir?" Victoria asked, and she couldn't quite keep the edge from her voice. "It looks like a senior officer in a position of power engaging in a relationship with someone who works in her building. It looks like a potential conflict of interest. It looks like someone whose personal life is suddenly affecting her professional reliability." Each word landed like a blow, but Victoria held her ground. "With respect, sir, my personal life hasn't affected my professional performance. My command is strong. My operations are successful. I've simply stopped working 18-hour days and started having a life outside these walls." "And if I told you that's not acceptable?" Morrison asked. "That at your level, personal life takes a backseat to duty?" Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. The old Victoria would have agreed, would have apologized, would have ended things with Marcus and returned to her empty apartment and her endless work. But the woman sitting in this chair wasn't that Victoria anymore. "Then I would ask you, sir, with all due respect, what exactly I've been sacrificing for," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I've given 30 years to the Navy. I've missed weddings, funerals, births. I've lost relationships, friendships, family connections. I've lived alone in empty apartments and eaten dinner at my desk more nights than I can count. And for what? So I could die one day having never lived? So I could be nothing but a rank and a file number?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I met someone who sees me," Victoria continued, and her voice cracked slightly. "Not Admiral Hayes, not 3 stars and a list of commendations. Me, the person underneath all of this. Someone who understands sacrifice because he's lived it. Someone who lost everything and kept going. Someone who's teaching me that duty matters, but so does love. So does connection. So does having a reason to come. Home that isn't just more work." "Victoria," Morrison started. "I'm not finished, sir." She took a breath. "I've spent my entire career being exactly what everyone needed me to be. Strong, tireless, dedicated to the exclusion of everything else. And I was proud of that. Until I realized that I'd built a life where no one would notice if I disappeared tomorrow except to wonder who would take my place." The words hung in the air like smoke. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want from me, Victoria?" "I want permission to be human," she said simply. "I want to do my job with excellence, which I've always done, while also having a life that matters. I want to love someone without it being treated as a professional failing. I want what every other officer is allowed to have, a family, a purpose beyond rank, and the knowledge that I'm more than just a position to be filled." "And if I can't give you that?" Morrison asked quietly. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but she held them back. "Then I'll request early retirement, sir, because I've finally found something worth more than this uniform, and I won't give it up, not even for the Navy." The silence that followed felt eternal. Morrison stood slowly and walked back to the window. Victoria waited, her heart in her throat, knowing she had just put everything on the line. Her career, her legacy, everything she'd built. "My wife left me 12 years ago," Morrison said finally, his back still to her. "She said I was married to the Navy, not to her. Said she was tired of being second place to a job that would never love me back. I told her she was being dramatic, told her duty mattered, that sacrifice was necessary." He turned to face Victoria, and his eyes were wet. "She was right," he said. "I chose this job over her, and you know what? The Navy didn't send flowers when she died 3 years ago, didn't come to the funeral, didn't care that I was alone, because the Navy isn't a person, it's an institution, and institutions don't love you back." Victoria's breath caught. "Don't make my mistake," Morrison said quietly. "Don't sacrifice everything real for something that will replace you the day you retire and never think of you again." "Sir?" Victoria whispered. Morrison moved back to his desk and pulled out a form. "I'm recommending you for reassignment to a strategic planning position, same rank, same pay, but it's primarily advisory. Standard office hours, weekends off. You'll still serve, but you'll have a life." Victoria stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "Sir, I don't understand." "You're one of the best officers I've ever known," Morrison said, "but you're also a person who deserves happiness. And if that means stepping back from operations to have time for the people you love, then that's what we'll do. The Navy needs good officers, but we don't need broken ones. And you were heading toward broken, Victoria. I saw it. I just didn't know how to help." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks despite her best efforts. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Morrison said with a small smile. "This new position will bore you to death for the first month, but it'll give you time to have dinner with your, what did you call him? Marcus? Time to go to his son's school events, time to remember you're a person, not just a rank." Victoria wiped her eyes quickly. I don't know what to say. Say you'll take the position. Say you'll build the life you deserve. And say you'll invite me to the wedding, because if you're this serious about him, I expect to meet the man who convinced Admiral Victoria Hayes to finally choose herself. Victoria laughed through her tears. I will, sir, all of the above. That evening, Victoria drove to Marcus's apartment, with her heart lighter than it had been in years. When he opened the door, she saw immediately that he'd been worried. His eyes were shadowed, his posture tense. How bad was it? He asked. Victoria stepped inside and kissed him, fully, deeply, the way she'd wanted to since the moment in the hospital hallway, but hadn't allowed herself. When she pulled back, Marcus stared at her in wonder. That's not the kiss of someone who just lost her career. That's the kiss of someone who just got her life back, Victoria said, and told him everything. Marcus listened, his expression moving through shock, relief, and finally joy. When she finished, he pulled her close, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You could have lost everything, he whispered against her hair. For me. For us. I didn't lose anything, Victoria said. I gained everything that matters. Victoria, I need you to understand something. Marcus pulled back to look at her. I never wanted to cost you your career. I never wanted you to have to choose. You didn't cost me anything, Victoria said firmly. You gave me the courage to choose myself, to choose a life instead of just existence. That's not a cost, that's a gift. But what if? No what ifs, Victoria interrupted. I made my choice. I'd make it again, and I'm not looking back. Marcus's eyes were wet. I love you so much. I love you too, Victoria said, and I'm ready to start building this life with you, really building it, not hiding it, not apologizing for it, just living it. From the hallway, Ethan's voice called out, Does this mean Victoria's staying for dinner? Because I made spaghetti and there's way too much for just 2 people. Victoria and Marcus laughed. Yes, Victoria called back. I'm staying for dinner, and maybe breakfast too. Gross, Ethan yelled, but he was laughing. Over the following months, Victoria's life transformed in ways she never imagined possible. The strategic planning position was indeed boring compared to combat operations, but it gave her something she'd never had. Time. Time to have dinner with Marcus and Ethan most evenings. Time to help Ethan with his homework. Time to attend his robotics, competitions, and school concerts. Time to simply exist as a person, not just a rank. She and Marcus made their relationship official, navigating the paperwork and regulations with surprising ease once Morrison ran interference. There were whispers, of course, there always would be, but Victoria found she didn't care. Let them whisper. She was too busy being happy. 6 months after that conversation in Morrison's office, Victoria stood in Marcus's apartment, watching him help Ethan prepare for his first high school entrance exam. The boy was nervous, bouncing his leg under the table, chewing his pencil. Hey, Victoria said gently, sitting down beside him. You've got this. You're brilliant. What if I'm not? Ethan asked, voicing the fear she heard in his voice. Then you try again, Victoria said. That's what your dad taught me. That failing doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're learning. And learning takes courage. Ethan looked at her with those thoughtful eyes, so much like his father's. Is that what you did, when you chose Dad over being an admiral full-time? Victoria smiled. I didn't stop being an admiral, Ethan. I just became other things too. A person, a partner, and if you'll have me, maybe someday a part of your family. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? Marcus appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching them with an expression of such love it made Victoria's chest ache. Really, Victoria confirmed, if that's something you'd want. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom would have liked you. She always said Dad needed someone strong, someone who wouldn't let him forget he was worth more than he thought. Victoria's throat tightened. I think I would have liked her too. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Anything. When you and Dad get married, can I be the best man? I know that's usually for adults, but I'm the one who's been here the whole time, and I kind of think I should get the job. Victoria looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at her, and in that moment, everything crystallized. Yes, Victoria said, but first, your dad and I should probably have that conversation. I'm having it right now, Marcus said, moving into the room. He took Victoria's hand, pulling her to her feet. Victoria Hayes, I know we've only known each other for 7 months. I know this is fast. I know there's 100 logical reasons to wait, but I've spent too much of my life waiting for the right moment, and I've learned that the right moment is when you find someone you can't imagine living without. He dropped to one knee. Ethan gasped. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth. I don't have a ring yet, Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly. And this proposal is happening in my kitchen with my son as a witness, instead of somewhere romantic. But that's appropriate because this life, the real, messy, beautiful one we're building, is what I'm offering you. Not perfection, not easy, just real. So, Victoria, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve to be loved, to be seen, to be more than your accomplishments? Victoria was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, not caring about appearances or composure or any of the armor she'd worn for 30 years. Yes, she whispered. Yes, absolutely yes. Marcus stood, pulling her into his arms, kissing her, while Ethan cheered in the background, and for the first time in her entire life, Victoria felt complete, not because someone else completed her, but because she had finally allowed herself to be whole. 1 year later, Victoria stood in a small garden ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered. Morrison was there, beaming like a proud father. Rosa and Tony and the other custodial staff sat in the front row, dressed in their best. Ethan stood beside Marcus, serving as best man with a pride that radiated from every pore. And Victoria's sister, Rebecca, sat in the second row with her 3 children, crying happy tears. They had reconnected 6 months earlier, Victoria finally reaching out after years of silence, finally understanding that family wasn't something you sacrificed for duty, it was something you fought to keep. When Victoria walked down the aisle, she wore her uniform, not because she was hiding behind rank, but because it represented part of who she was. And Marcus wore his dress blues, the ones he'd kept in the back of his closet, his service ribbons restored to their proper place. 2 naval officers, 2 people who had served and sacrificed and found each other in the margins of the world they'd both inhabited but never truly connected in. The ceremony was simple. The vows were honest. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus kissed her with a tenderness that said everything words couldn't. At the reception, Morrison pulled Victoria aside. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Not for the commendations or the rank. For this, for choosing life. Thank you, sir, Victoria said, for showing me it was possible. Call me Frank, he said. We're off duty. Victoria smiled. Thank you, Frank. As the evening continued, Victoria found herself standing with Marcus on the edge of the garden, watching Ethan dance awkwardly with one of Rebecca's daughters, both of them laughing. Regrets? Marcus asked softly. Victoria thought about her answer carefully, thought about the career she'd modified, the late nights she no longer worked, the operations she no longer ran. Not even one, she said. You? Only that I didn't meet you sooner, Marcus said. We met when we were supposed to, Victoria said, when we were both ready to see each other. Marcus pulled her close, and they swayed gently to the music drifting from the reception. "I saw a janitor," Victoria murmured, "and missed a decorated officer, a devoted father, a man of extraordinary character." "I saw an admiral," Marcus said, "and missed a lonely woman who needed someone to remind her she was human." "We were both blind," Victoria said. "But we see each other now," Marcus replied, "and that's what matters." As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Victoria Hayes Chen, retired admiral and current strategic advisor, wife and chosen mother, stood in the arms of the man who had taught her that rank was just a title, but love was a choice you made every day. She had spent 30 years building walls. It took one man with a mop bucket and a kind heart to show her that the strongest thing she could do was tear them down. And on the other side of those walls, she found everything she'd been missing. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.